Welcome to the Holding All the Cards podcast. My name's Daniel. I go by Kiramode on the forums, and today I'm going to talk about deck testing. Now, seeing as how we're entering regional season, this feels like the right time to talk about this, and also I just finished Worlds too, so it's kind of fresh on my mind. When it comes to testing, there's a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to talk about the way I choose to do it, and how you test is also dependent on how much time you have. So this video's geared more towards players who are looking to be efficient, right? Players who they don't have time to test every deck under the sun. So if you are that kind of person and you can test everything and you have the time for that, then great, more power to you. I mean, like, for a month prior to Worlds, I was like a recluse. I came home from work, I went to the computer, I played Fool on Skype, and I was just practicing, trying to play decks against as many different players as possible to get a diverse feel for what you're up against, just in preparation, right? Not everyone's going to do that, right? And particularly for regional, when I test for regional, I'm testing for maybe like 4 or 5 days, right? Like I'm not testing that long to go to regional. So I don't expect other people to do that. I think other people, they have other games they play, they have kids, they have other activities. Like not everyone plays Star Wars every single day. And that's fine, right? That's not the end of the world, but people still want to do well, so I'll talk about some tips that I have to speed up the testing process. So my first tip for doing well in these testings is, if you're going to pick a deck that is an established good deck. Alright, so just don't get cute. It's okay to change a deck, right? You don't need to straight up net deck something. But if you're playing Star Wars long enough, you probably know what the good decks are, right? So on Dark Side for Sith, GA Vader plus really any 8 other red pods. If you're playing Navy, 2 Tarkin, 2 Yularen, 2 Chimera, 1 Endor Entrapment, 3 Grey Pods. And then for Scum, you go 2 Dengar, 2 Caesar, 1 Rancor, 5 other green pods. Like, I mean, this ain't rocket science. Everyone knows those are the good pods. And then there's a couple other deck types within Darkside, right? And those are a little bit more detailed, a little bit more creative. And for those ones, you might have to stick a little bit more to a script. And then, of course, maybe you have your own creation. And if you have your own creation, that kind of goes in a separate category, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. But this is more for the masses, right? Pick something that's established and work from there. Now, on light side, it's a little bit tougher, right? Light side doesn't have quite as obvious established deck types. Really, every single light side deck is more detailed and refined, because you have to be a little bit more creative when your cards just aren't quite as good as the other side. But there's still plenty of deck types, right? The capital ship deck type is Home 1, Independence, and Defiance, and then from there you kind of decide which pods you like best. The fighters have a lot of different variants, but they all start with Hobby and they all start with Defensive Yavin 4. And you branch out from there. You can go Aggro Jedi with Luke, Owen, Yoda, or you can go more of a Control Jedi where you start off with Yoda and Q-Ron, and then you can go from there. Then you also have your Kanan deck, so which Kanan has kind of 2 split ways to go. One version is you play the Kanan Dodonna Guardian, super slow, build your board version. The other one is the Kanan Zeb Gamor Mystic version of the deck. There's options. Like you can kind of pick whichever deck you feel most comfortable with and then start testing, right? Make your own. Maybe you start off with someone else's build and you modify it to fit some idea you have. Maybe you want to incorporate some new pods, but that's where you start. You start with the established decks. So that would be my first tip. The second tip I have is, when you're testing, do not test against your weaknesses. Alright, when you build a deck in your head, you probably already know what you're going to be good against, what you're going to be bad against. And really, when you make a deck, regardless of, because I did an earlier video where we talk about fundamental questions, and I talk about whether your deck's proactive or reactive. Regardless of whether it's proactive or reactive, you kind of know what you want to see. So let's say you're building a proactive deck. and you say, okay, I need to see my deck do whatever, and my weakness is something else. Okay, well, don't play against the weakness. Play against, the other decks that are in the meta, with the exception of whatever is your weakness. And let's see if your deck can do what it's supposed to do. Let's see if when you draw your cards, do the cards tend to come in the right order? Do you always have resources for the combos you're looking to hit? Do the pieces fall in place often, right? Run it 5 or 6 times and let's see, does the deck work? And if the deck works, then you look at testing against your weakness and see if they can disrupt you, right? Because it's a proactive deck. So you say, okay, well, I see that my deck works when I'm not against the weakness. Now that I know it works, let's put it up against the weakness and see if the weakness can disrupt what I'm trying to do, or if I can, for the most part, weather the storm. And then if you're playing a reactive deck, so you're building a deck that's specifically built to counter another type of deck, well, then play against that, right? So if you build a dark side deck that's specifically built to take on May the Force Be With You, play against May the Force Be With You. Let's see if it can do that. And then once you try it against a couple different versions of May the Force Be With You, right? Once you run against a couple different types of deck that you're supposed to beat, then you run it against capital ships, then you run it against fighters, and then see how you do against that. But you don't want to go out of the gate against your weakness, because that's not giving you good information. That's not helpful. You don't know whether or not your deck's actually good. You just know that it's bad against what you expect to be bad against. And generally, when people build decks, particularly reactive decks that are built to counter certain types of decks, they're building it to counter those because they expect to play against them. So let's see if it can take care of business. My third tip would be, when you're choosing a deck, you shouldn't be looking, or how to say, you're looking for the deck, not a deck. So this again comes back to the time thing. If you have time for it, obviously the best way to test is you take every single deck that you could conceivably play, run them all, see every single deck, play them all in your hand, see which one's perfect for you, and then go with that. Most people don't have that time. So if you're strapped for time and you need to decide relatively quickly, every single deck you play should be a deck that, provided you don't get any bad information, you're going to run. So here would be an example. Let's say I decide I want to play a Force Hunter deck. I think people are going to be running Yoda like crazy. I want to play Force Hunters, and I have this deck in mind. Okay, so you run Force Hunters, run it against Yoda, 5 or 6 times. Let's see how it does. Let's say you smoke Yoda. You win, 5 games. Like you win 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 7 or something. Like you're just smoking the Yoda matchup. Then you run it against a couple more oddball cases, right? You run it against a couple aggro ship decks and see how you do against that. You run it against a couple more control-oriented light side decks that don't necessarily need to take the Force, or maybe they have a lot more protection. Like maybe you run it against Survivors, so then Bane's objective is kind of worthless, right? So you run it against the weakness, and then you see, okay, well, this deck's still good. If that is the case, you do no more testing, right? You are now done testing because your deck passed the test. Now, you can't have the mentality of, oh, well, it passed the test, but let me see if this other deck passes the test. So that's the wrong mentality, because then you didn't go into the testing with the right idea. You should be going into your testing looking to confirm whether or not your deck that already is clear up here, right? Your deck you've already mentally decided is a deck you want to run, and provided, barring any bad fortune, you will run. So if it passes your test, you're done. And I think a lot of players, they'll pick a deck and it does well, and then they'll test something else for some reason anyways, and that's a mistake. Like they're not decided. So the best way to do this is just pick a deck, right? Whatever's the best one, you run it and play it. And the reason I say to do this is that it's more important to be good with one deck than to be good with a bunch of decks. Because one of the skills in this game is knowing every single card of your deck. It's knowing all the possible combos, all the interactions, what you need to draw, what you're looking to dig for, what you need to discard at the start of your turns, all of that stuff matters, and the best way to get good at that is to simply play the deck, right? The more reps you have with the same deck, the better you're going to do. Like, I'd rather run a deck that I am 100% familiar with, that is a B plus deck, over an A plus deck that I just don't know how to run. Because or maybe that I kind of know how it works, but I don't know every single little trick with the deck. Like you play what you know. So this is where picking a deck and testing to confirm the deck is better, because you pick the deck, you test it, you got the information you wanted. Now at this point, it's already your deck. Any testing you do at this point isn't to determine whether or not you're playing the deck. You've already decided you're playing the deck. It's, let me just get a little bit more fine-tuned with the deck. And then my last point is you gotta fire decks quickly. So I have a general rule of thumb when I'm building decks, and this isn't even necessarily when I'm building a deck for a tournament. It's more just when sometimes I'll build a deck and it works, sometimes I'll build a deck and it doesn't work, sometimes decks surprise me, sometimes they don't, it just kind of depends. But one of my rule of thumbs is I have two, not totally connected rules, but somewhat connected rules. And it's let's say a deck gets everything you can realistically expect it to get. So let's say I'm playing a Sith deck, I get the turn 1 Chuds plus resource, I get the turn 2 Vader, and I get the turn 3 Pout, right? That's what you want out of the deck. Or let's say I'm playing a combo deck, right? So let's say on the other side I'm playing like a Freeholder plus a New Hope deck, and the goal is I want to be in a position where I New Hope, wipe their board, then get like 2 Freeholders out on the cheap, and just see how that goes. And let's say I'm able to trigger the combo, right? So let's say I'm getting everything I realistically can want, right? I'm not asking for the nuts, right? Not asking for that. I'm just saying you play the deck. When you build a deck, you kind of know what you want to see. Let's assume you get that. Do you still lose? If the answer is I still lost the game, that deck is immediately fired. It's done. Like, there's no more discussion to be had. And my reasoning for that is it doesn't matter how well my opponent drew. If I played a deck and I got what I wanted and I still lose, I'm not playing it, because I know I can always play Jedi, and if Jedi gets everything they want, they're not going to lose. And if I play Navy and Navy gets everything they want, I know they're not going to lose. So why would I play another deck that I know that already fails if I get everything I want? So that would be an instant fireable offense. And then there's a similar rule that I have, which is, can a deck pull games out of its ass? So sometimes you're in situations where, like, your opponent is just drawing perfectly. Like, they are drawing all the cards you don't want to see. You're drawing kind of crappy. Does the deck still find a way to pull a game out of its ass? If the answer is yes, that doesn't mean I necessarily will place it at the top of my deck list, but it definitely gets points, right? So the other one, it's a fireable offense, right? You get everything you want and still lose, you're fired. But if you pull games out of your ass, then that's just points, right? Because at some point you're gonna have a bunch of good decks, and to me the big tiebreaker is which ones they can make chicken salad out of chicken shit the best. So those are kind of similar rules, but I think for testing purposes it's more important to just know when to fire somebody, right? So again, this goes back to the thing where if you draw what you want, and you should know what you want, right? Everyone, when they build the deck, they know exactly what they're looking to hit. If you hit the cards, it does not matter how lucky your opponent got. It doesn't matter that you made like a big mistake or whatever. If you somehow lost with the cards you want, you're fired. That's it. There's no more discussion to be had. You just got to get rid of it. Because again, we're trying to be efficient here, right? So if you're over here trying to rescue a lost cause when you don't have time, you're just done. So that's how you can speed up the process, right? when you go into your testing, you should have probably 3, 4, maybe 5 decks that you're really looking to play. Have a pecking order, right? Make your decks ahead of time, and then just start running, right? So take the best deck, right? The deck that you perceive to be the best deck, and practice with it. And if it passes your test, great, you're running that deck. If you play a game against somebody and you draw what you want and you lose, so if you still find a way to lose, okay, well then you're fired. Next deck up. And let's just run through all the decks, because most players, self included, will start a testing process and they think they know what the deck is, and then they find out that they're dead wrong. They start testing and they realize, oh crap, my deck sucks. Or I didn't realize this one issue with the deck, or I didn't realize this other deck that's commonly played in the meta is a problem, so crap, okay, I guess I can't play it. Like, you're probably not gonna end up playing whatever's your first choice when you start your testing, and that's fine. That's okay. But I think testing, if you want to be efficient, it's all about your mentality. It's all about knowing what you're trying to accomplish. So I'll go back over my 4 tips that I had, right? Tip number 1, pick a deck that's within the established meta, right? Again, and it doesn't have to be net decked, but it does have to be within the frameworks of commonly used decks. Second tip is, you're not testing against your weaknesses out of the gate, right? You test against, like when you test a deck, you're looking to see if it works. Does it do what it's intended to do? Then you test against the weaknesses and see if it still holds up. Number 3 would be, you're testing to find the deck, not a deck. Alright? So every deck that you test, when you are testing that deck, that is a deck you are going to run at the tournament if all goes well. Right? If you don't see anything that happens in your testing that makes you say this deck's fired, you run it. You don't test other decks, right? You can't have that mentality of, oh, well, let me test this other deck just in case. That's the wrong way to look at it. You just go in with the deck. And if you weren't willing to run that deck before, then you really shouldn't have started the testing with that deck in the first place. And then the last tip is, when you're testing, you got to know when to fire these decks. All right? If the deck gets what it wants and it still loses, it's out. Move on to the next deck. Now, there was something that I mentioned earlier that I want to come back to, which is sometimes people have decks that are outside the established framework of decks. And really, that's how decks come into the framework, right? At some point, someone's going to be that guy that runs a deck that's different, a deck that people haven't seen before, a deck that people haven't theorized yet, and they're going to do really well, and then it eventually becomes part of the meta. It becomes a deck that everyone starts running. So the question is, well, what if I'm running that, right? Like you say, I want to run a certain type of deck. That's fine. You can take the same approach as that I just mentioned, but when you're running a more off the wall deck, what I would stress in this one is the part where I said you're looking to find the deck. If you're testing an off the wall deck, it needs to be the deck. So if you test it and it works, you gotta go with your gut, right? If it works, you gotta stick with it, right? You can't test other decks. Like if this is a deck that you've decided you want to test, you want to run it, you want to see if it can be your deck, and throughout the testing it survives all of the testing process that you have in front of it, then you run it. I think a perfect example of this would be prior to Worlds, I got to talk to Colby Bernardo. He's one of the dudes that does articles for the Shadow Archive, and I thought this dude was insane. Like, this guy was gonna run. He ran Hoth Luke, man. So he ran both Hoth Luke and Hoth Wedge at Worlds. Now, when I heard because I also got to play him right before the tournament, I didn't want to play his deck, and the reason I didn't want to play against it was it's a vehicle deck, and my deck was a reactive deck that was built to counter characters. So when I hear he's playing vehicles, I obviously want no part of that. But with him though, he's one of those like really creative players who has a lot of different ideas for decks. And at some point, he wanted to make, I guess, a vehicle deck that was all about winning edge and just pounding an opponent down in the face. Um, but what the important thing to note here is he built a deck. It worked. It passed his testing process. The man ran it at Worlds, and he did really, really well, right? Like the guy ended up fifth after Swiss. I think he got O2'd once he was in the top cut, but I mean, just because you lose in the top cut doesn't mean you're a bad player. I mean, Tom Malucci got O2'd in the top cut, and that guy was world champion last year. It's not an indication of him being a bad player or that his deck wasn't good enough to win. It just means when you got to the top 16, you know, your decks weren't hot and someone else's were. But that's the important thing to know, right? If you're gonna run something nutty, you gotta commit. You gotta be into the deck, or like myself, right? Like I've been in on the Kraken since it came out. Like I've just been in on the pod. I love the recursion. I was gonna run it last year, and then the Ban Hammer came on, or the Errata Hammer came on the deck I was gonna run, so I had to scramble for another deck. But I didn't have enough time to adjust before Worlds last year. But really, since that time has come, I've been trying to find different ways to make that pod work, just because it fits my playstyle so much that I can't help but run it if at all possible. And a lot of players have pet pods, right? Like I'm not the only person in this community that has like the one pod that they are always trying to make work in decks. Everyone has their own pet pods, and that's fine. But if you're gonna have a pet pod and you're gonna be testing all the time, you're gonna be playing with it all the time, you need to commit to it. And when you do testing, you need to see if your deck can survive the testing, and if your deck does survive the testing, you need to keep pushing forward with the deck and take it seriously. Because if you don't, then you're gonna set yourself up for failure. You're gonna be running a deck that maybe you're not as experienced with, or maybe you have the deck, right? You have the deck right in front of you, and all you need to do is just practice with the deck so you yourself are more refined with the deck. And the best way to do that is to just avoid the other decks. So, to recap again, tip number 1, pick decks within the established framework. And 1A would be if you pick a deck that's not within the established framework, you're picking like your own creation or a more rogue deck, commit to the thing. Then tip number 2, don't test against your weaknesses. Test against what you're trying to do, right? The decks that you're trying to beat, the decks that you expect to play against, see if you do that. And then if your deck works, right, if your deck does what it's supposed to do, and again, 5 or 6 times minimum, right? Like you should really be testing closer to 10, but not everyone has that kind of time. So you got to get sufficient reps in, but let's assume that you get all your reps in. Then you test against the weaknesses. Then you see, okay, well, how do I handle these other decks? Then the other one would be you're testing for the deck, right? Every deck that you test needs to be a deck that you say, should it pass through the testing process, right? So if I establish that it does what it's supposed to do, and after I find out that it does what it's supposed to do, I test it against the weaknesses, and it handles the weaknesses. If it does all that, then I'm running it, right? There's no more testing on that side. I am just running my deck, and any more games that I play with that deck are no longer testing to see whether the deck's good. It's refinement time, right? I'm practicing with the deck. I'm gonna play this more and more to make sure that I don't make mistakes with the deck, because I already know the deck can play. And then the last thing is, when you're testing, you gotta fire pods, or sometimes it's pods on its entire decks, but you gotta know, right? You draw the cards you want, the deck still loses, then the deck's fired. And I think if you have this process, this is something that you can really do. So if you're on short time, or maybe you only have 1, 2, 3 nights of testing and that's it, then you can knock out the testing, you can get to the deck you want, and you're not wasting time. But hey, look, the best way to do it is if you're just an avid player and you're playing all the time, you're kind of doing testing as you go in all likelihood. So you don't need to do this, but not everyone does that. A lot of people play jank decks. A lot of people, they don't really get their competitive gears going until like right before the event. So if you're one of those players and you're just short on time, these tips are here for you. Hope you enjoyed the show.